welcome to Fortifying Patient Privacy. We're empowering doctors' offices with a people first mindset and cutting edge cyber resilience. Um, let's get started with some introductions on the speakers today, and we'll get into it. All right, Heidi, could you give us a quick summary of your expertise, please?
Hi, my name is Heidi Tolchinsky. I am a licensed independent social worker and a licensed independent chemical dependency counselor. Um, Short for that is I'm a therapist. I do mental health and substance use. I work both in a nonprofit agency and I have my own private practice. So at this point in my career, I should better be pretty familiar with HIPAA.
Nice. Awesome. Mr. Daniel Sweeten, my colleague here at Kintech. Give us a brief here uh, of your
Yep.
bio, if you could, please.
So I have been in the IT industry for over a decade. The past 5 years, I've been in security and compliance, cybersecurity, certified ethical hacker. I understand the approaches that hackers will take, both from a external and internal point of view. Uh, I'm familiar with the ways that they will try to breach your systems to access information. Um, and I've spent the past 5 years helping companies put in safeguards to prevent that, as well as on the compliance side of the house, making sure that whether it's HIPAA, CMMC, NIST, uh, for whatever it is that they have to meet, that they can meet and exceed those standards. So,
Awesome. And Mr. Brian, if you don't mind doing it as well, I'd appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. I'm Brian Doty. I work in the channel development team here at Kaseya in Datto. So I've been in the technology sales uh, business for, well, pushing 20 years now. But yeah, really, my focus has always been helping businesses, the small to medium businesses with technology, and really got into the cybersecurity space really in the last 10 years, helping these small to medium businesses really figure out their best strategy going forward for being more cyber resilient.
Awesome. All right. Um, let's go ahead and get into the meat and potatoes over here, guys. Um, as you all know, there's been quite a bit of cyber risks and incidents happening recently. We've listed a few here that are relevant to the healthcare industry. Just recently, the County of Los Angeles Department of Mental Health was hacked. It affected almost 1,600 of their users. Call for Health Inc. was hacked 3 days prior to that. So it's all basically happening last month. And they had over 10,000 users affected. And Badalamenti Perlito Orthodontics was hacked through a desktop computer, and it affected over 1,400 users. So some recent incidents that are tending to be something that happens a little more and more frequently here. Um, so I'm going to go ahead and move on unless anyone has something they'd like to add.
Well, I think what you're seeing, is this uptick, of course, in this space because of the sensitivity of the information, the industry that you're in. That's one of those things that we're seeing more and more of a focus for cyber criminals going after healthcare organizations, and a lot of the smaller ones. This was something that always surprised me, kind of being more of a generalist, but some of the even smaller organizations where PHI was exposed, credentials were exposed, things like that, where organizations are now facing fines and penalties, even just for making those sort of mistakes and not following HIPAA's guidelines. So that's something that we're seeing more and more. So there was one just a couple of years ago, not even an incident so much, but rather the mishandling of that PHI that we talk about so much in this space, but two records were mishandled and it cost that organization $36,000. And so we're sort of seeing where not only the incidents are upticking, but now we're sort of seeing the teeth in the regulation that's coming out of it. So there's a reason for that, right? So yeah, we're certainly seeing more and more of these incidents, and to look and see that there's three just last month in the healthcare space that were rather public, if you could say. That's kind of that's kind of a new thing too, where more and more companies have to disclose. Whereas in the past, people could kind of hide it. Maybe they paid the ransom. Maybe they were able to go from backup and restore, but they never had to. They didn't have to disclose, or they were at least getting away with not disclosing this information like they have to now. So um, it's pretty eye opening stuff, of course.
Yep. Nice. All right, guys. Moving on here. I'm going to discuss some of the best practices for securing your business and data privacy. Just going to read through it here, and any of our panelists can feel free to chime in and expand on any of these points here. But the key part is understanding the importance of data privacy in healthcare, making sure that you're implementing encryption and access controls, that critical elements of a robust data privacy policy. Make sure you have those in check, and regular audits and monitoring of data systems. Does anybody want to kind of discuss what each one of these means, or maybe kind of break it down in more layman's terms?
Yeah, so this is one of my areas of expertise. We've seen, whether it's with a small doctor's office, we've seen with larger companies and corporations, um, especially whenever it comes to the encryption and access control, that internally, just from them being familiar with working somebody, they will end up getting more lax, more lenient. They might write a password down. They might have it stuck to a keyboard, to a monitor, something of that nature, especially if it's a computer or a system that multiple people will log into throughout the day. Not only can that be gleaned from anybody just walking by, but on those devices themselves, since they're not adhering to the strict policies and procedures that have been put in place, it generally makes it easier for somebody to go through and breach one of those systems. Um, People are creatures of habit. I mean, how many of you out there wake up in the morning and the first thing you do is take your dog out, start the coffee pot? You have the same rhythm that you go through. That's just a fact of life. People are like that with their passwords as well. So they might have what they think is a complex password, but then whenever it's time to change it, they're like, oh, the last digit was an 11. I'm just going to change it to a 12, and I'm going to call it a day. And that's what they keep doing. But then they might use that password for their email login. They might use it for their bank login. They might use it for a Facebook login, something of that nature, just because they think it's complex and they're like, oh, it's 8 to 12 digits. It meets all the criteria, and it always says, oh, hey, it's a strong password. I don't have anything to worry about. Well, that strong password on average, even through brute force or some other method of attack, can be breached in about 15 seconds or less. So it's not really that secure for somebody who has not even advanced levels of training in the encryption and cryptology field, but just saw a YouTube video. It's no longer a field or an area where you have these people with all this high levels of complex training trying to go through and breach. Um, Now that information is more readily available, more people are trying it, more people are seeing what they can do. Um, More people are getting access to the torrent browsers, to onion sites, things of that nature, trying to link up and connect with more people. See, Brian's over here shaking his head. Yep. And that's just a common communication method that a lot of anywhere from budding hackers or activists or hacktivists, if you want to combine the two,
Yeah.
that they will start working towards, just to meet other people and then saying, oh, hey, saw this, I saw that. um, especially since 2020 when everybody started working from home. Before that, most people's information was locked behind the company. You had to breach at a company level to get anything.
Right.
Most people still work from home. So now you're not behind all these company safeguards. You're not um, as protected as you used to be. Even though a lot of systems have started moving more towards the cloud and more towards web-based login, those are those have been hacked and breached and attacked ever since the beginning of the internet. That was the main factor that people focused on. So trying to find a way to make sure that passwords and complexity are kept to a high standard, making sure that they're rotated, they're not being reused, making sure that it's not meeting any passwords that's on a top 10,000 or top 50,000 list, that it's not even a part of that. That significantly helps. Making sure that even working from home, the work computer is in a zero trust environment, making sure that, yes, Heidi.
I was gonna say in the working from home piece, and I know nothing about IT or cybersecurity, so, my understanding is that, a VPN helps keep things even more secure. And then, the two-factor authentication, so that
Correct.
even when you're working from home, all of those files are protected. I don't, I, is that, am I kind of getting
So
that
that
correct?
yes, that is true. Both of those things significantly help. Here recently, we have also seen that Microsoft has said if you use Office, if you have an Azure tenant, anything of that nature, if you're not using MFA, they have stopped giving people a choice and they have forced out the MFA. Because now, if I have your username and password, Heidi, and if I go to sign in to your email to try to set rules up and forwarding so that way certain emails meeting certain criteria get sent to me instead of you, so that way you never see them,
Mhm.
I still need that 2FA code. I still need something that you would physically have on you to be able to get into that environment. And for phishing attacks, for man in the middle attacks, for business attacks, that was a
So I,
common method that people would use.
I think it's also important not just for, how do you log into the company's data, whatever
Mhm.
programs you're using for documentation, um, all
Mhm.
of those things need to have MFAs as well, different
Correct.
passwords. So it's not just the VPN keeps you secure, it's making sure that the programs that you're using for your documentation and things like that are also highly protected.
Correct.
Mhm.
Which that's that's an example that I like to go back to. A friend of mine, uh, he would always describe it whenever he was teaching the cryptology class as, imagine having a house that has all your valuables, your family's valuables, anybody you know, everything locked inside of it. You can have a door that could, make Fort Knox proud, everything. But every window in the house is left open. Yeah, you might have to jump a little bit. You might have to put a little bit of manual work into it, but that window's open. So you were exactly right. By not having MFA, by not having everything else behind those same standards, that's exactly what you're doing. You're making sure that, okay, from exactly where I'm logging in, it is completely secure. But as soon as I get through that, it's just wide open. Now, anybody can jump in the middle. So,
Right. One of
Great
the
insight.
things that it mentions here is like regular audits and
mhm,
monitoring data systems. The regular auditing thing is something that I see a lot of small businesses fall down on this. They might do an initial assessment with their IT provider, or they'll do an assessment with their internal IT staff, and they'll say, okay, here's where we're at. We're meeting these. Um, we're meeting compliance regulation. We're meeting HIPAA standards. But but what happens is things change in an environment, right?
correct.
users come and go. People are hired and offboarded.
Software and hardware gets updated and changed out.
Well,
Correct.
now, I mean, HIPAAs have to be had to be updated for telehealth, for texting, so it's constantly being updated.
Correct.
Right.
And I think, audits are great if you are any kind of healthcare organization. You should probably be reviewing HIPAA with all of your employees at a minimum of one time per quarter.
Yeah. Yeah, there's certainly training around that. Having a good security awareness training goes a long way in that. And then as it relates to HIPAA as well, you'll see where that kind of dovetails in, and you'll see that content and that training that regularly goes along with it as well. It's very important stuff.
And and Brian, not to cut you off real quick,
Oh, you're
but
okay, yeah.
but just again to touch base on the audit and the monitoring, about hardware being changed out, being upgraded, the software updates, things of that nature. That's why it's also good to have at minimum an annual penetration test done, just so that way it can look at everything and say, okay, last year, here's where your infrastructure was at, your firewalls, your servers, but you did updates, you replaced hardware, you've made changes to it. And even though it was newer systems, newer upgrades, did anything get skipped over during that? Is there something that doesn't quite link up to how it used to that now has a gap? And that's something that a penetration test can help cover. And we've seen a lot of times, especially with small to medium sized companies, regardless of the industry, as soon as that's mentioned, they immediately start kind of pumping the brakes and saying, no, we're good, because they're thinking, from what they've heard, where some companies might pay $150,000 for a penetration test, like Shell, Exxon, Dell, HP, things of that nature. The thing to keep in mind is the cost of these tests are dependent upon also the size of your organization. So if you have a small to medium sized business, it's not going to be anywhere remotely close to that range.
Right.
So definitely find somebody, contact us. We can see how many people you have, how many endpoints you have, and we can, set them up annually, set them up quarterly, things of that nature. So that way you do have these reports and you can sit here and go, oh, here's something that needs to be changed. Here's something that needs to be updated. So that way it's just one less avenue for somebody to try to maliciously get inside your network and get inside your systems. Because
One
I
of the things
guarantee
that
you, the cost of the penetration test is a lot cheaper than the cost of an after effect of an attack.
That's one of the things I was going to hit on there, Daniel, is that a lot of people don't realize it's riskier to not do anything than it is to be preventative. And I know in healthcare, we always talk about preventative care and how we want to be ahead of the risks that could happen health wise. It's the same thing with cyber health. We want to be ahead of those risks and try to make sure that we're protecting ourselves, not for if it happens, but for when there may be an attempt for something to happen, you're ready and prepared to handle it in a better way than if you weren't doing any proactive measures.
That's a good point, Felix. Yeah.
Appreciate that, guys. I'm going to go ahead and move on here to the next slide here. Developing a culture of cyber awareness. Discussing here the importance of fostering a cyber aware culture. I think Brian mentioned a little bit about the cyber awareness trainings. That's a good way to kind of go into about it as well. Training programs for staff on cybersecurity best practices, encouraging reporting of suspicious activities, and promoting a proactive approach to cybersecurity.
So when it comes to HIPAA, you shouldn't really be encouraging. It's you have to. If so it's encouraging your employees to know what a violation is, what's suspicious, and immediately go and speak to your supervisor. Because when it comes to HIPAA, these things have to be reported.
Correct.
Yeah. That's a great point. So
You know,
I like
yep,
to
go
tell a
ahead.
story because I travel a lot. I give these presentations around the country about cybersecurity and cyber resilience. And last fall, I was flying to Phoenix for an event, and this woman sits down in the middle seat, and she was in a hurry. She was a little annoyed she had to sit in the middle seat too. She pops open her laptop, and she's got the password right on a post-it note, right on the laptop, and then she opens up her password manager on her cell phone, which isn't mine is not showing up. But anyway, she puts it on her laptop screen so that she can see the password to type it in, which is not really the best way to use a password manager. But she logged into her private equity account with the company she worked for that had $1.7 million worth of vested equity in. And I was using the sophisticated technology of a cell phone camera, like an iPhone 10 or whatever. And I had access to that if I wanted it. It made for an interesting conversation. But when you talk about having that cyber aware culture, it's just not top of mind to most people. And so when we talk
Yep.
about quarterly training, we talk about it all the time. We eat, sleep, and breathe this stuff, all of us guys on here. Like this is our world. And you know, for something to slip past us even as a possibility, but it's top of mind to us because we live it. We live in this world. But go outside of that, and you're an accountant or you're a physician. It's just not top of mind, and so you have to create that environment in your organization where training is a regular thing, and it's kind of we've gone about it, or we've seen it gone about several different ways. One where you train people and you sort of abuse the people who don't pass the training or don't do well. We've seen where that hasn't worked so well. It's kind of fun to begin with, but then it sort of becomes a problem where you have repeat offenders, things like that. And it sort of becomes an HR issue eventually, especially when you have the regulatory compliance involved. So there's so many pieces of this that come together, and especially when you're talking about healthcare, it's just the stakes are very high.
Brian, and if I could ask you a question here on the trainings that I've seen that there's some trainings that can be done through videos, some are monthly, some are quarterly, and there's, from what I've seen, not particularly long videos. Is that something that you would recommend? Is that something that applies heavily to the healthcare industry? Just love your insight on that.
Yeah, were you asking me, Felix? Sorry.
Yes, sir. Yes, Brian.
Okay. Yeah, so with regard to HIPAA, it's a requirement. And it's a requirement that all of your employees not only take like cybersecurity training, but training on the handling of what we call PHI, or personal personal healthcare information. I always like messing stuff up because it depends on the industry you're in. But with healthcare, PHI is your the information that you would see on your health records, which are private and they're meant to be kept private. But in this digital world we live in, the efficiency gain is great, but of course we have threat actors who are after that. And so when organizations are lazy about how they handle it, that's where the regulatory compliance steps in. It's trying to get organizations to take this seriously, to say, hey, we can't have patient information leaked out there. So training employees is key to doing this and making sure that everyone in the organization understands that, you know, it's like leaving somebody's chart on the table in the waiting room and walking away, if you mishandle this kind of stuff. So it's about thinking like that and doing it on a quarterly level. Doing it in small bite-sized pieces is very important, so it just doesn't overwhelm people, but it keeps it in their mind, thinking about it as they go through their day doing their whatever regular tasks they have to do.
Just to touch on that as well. Another thing that we've noticed, especially whenever it comes to the cybersecurity awareness training, um, or just most training in general, it's if you don't use it all the time, you lose it, you forget about it, right? So uh, both us as well as a lot of other cybersecurity minded individuals, they started setting up sessions where they might send out an email blast, maybe to the HR team or to an accounting team at one of their clients with a intentionally suspicious and fake email. That's done through a system that reports back and shows when it hit their mailbox, did they open it, did they click a link on it, anything of that nature. And then that is a report that comes back for them to say, hey, they took a training on this a week ago, and now here's proof that either, yes, they were able to grasp and understand and follow what was presented to them, or maybe they need a little bit more training on it. And depending on the environment, that's something that can continuously be pushed out until the point to where a majority of the workforce in that environment, as soon as they see one of those emails come through, they go, I really don't want to get called into HR again. So you know what? And instead of them trying to look at it, the first thing they're going to do is just, okay, report is fake, report is suspicious. It looks weird.
Right.
And then when we come back and go, yeah, we only sent 2 out the past month and you reported what, 10, 12 of them? I mean, it's paying off. It's working.
Right. Right. It makes people more cautious.
Correct.
Yeah, and rightfully so. And that the phishing testing, the phishing simulations are so key because when you think about it, like it used to be, you'd get the email from the Nigerian prince and all that. It was so obvious, right? And like, but the thing about it is when you and then go back to like COVID days, which were well after the Nigerian prince, how good were they at these phishing emails during COVID?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they mimicked. Think of whatever federal organization you can imagine that was putting out information on COVID, do this, don't do that kind of stuff, and having hyperlinks all through
Yep.
them. And they got so good at these that, the phishing attacks just skyrocketed through COVID.
Yes,
And
they
that
did.
was one of the main attack vectors that you saw during COVID was the phishing emails. And I
Correct.
think that's still probably the most common, I would say, attack vector is still phishing emails. Is that
Correct. And as long as you're going to have people that are still working from home and working in off-site locations, that's going to be the main source of it. And then as soon as one person, it doesn't matter if your company is 10 people, 100 people, 1,000 people or more, as soon as one person clicks one of those links, then it lets those threat actors know, hey, we have a verified email that will click it, that will do something with it. So now they start ramping the attacks up. So instead of it going from a broad list of just random companies, businesses, and all of that, they use this to constantly whittle it down. And you can go look over the past 5 to 10 years, and you can see there's primary key points throughout the year when attacks escalate. Beginning of summer, between Thanksgiving and Christmas, and then usually end of January. So as soon as everybody's kids are home and everybody's out of school, that's whenever they start hitting. During the holiday season, they ramp it up again because that's when a lot of money is flowing. People buying presents, they're planning trips, things of that nature. And then right after the first of the year, everybody's still trying to get back into the swing of things. That's when they're hoping to, hit and try to pick up somebody who, still might be in vacation mode. And that's been a constant cycle for the past 5 to 10 years of when these attacks will skyrocket and then they'll drop back down. That's usually whenever you see the 0 day attacks come out, when you'll see, the big breaches and the big hits happen. So that's something else to keep in mind is also what time of year it is.
Yeah, and one of the things here is like talking about advanced threat detection and response tools. A lot of investment. I want to say somewhere around 70% of the like technology spend on cybersecurity investment is more on that protection side. So
Mhm.
sort of preventing something from getting through, like
Right.
ransomware, for example. But once it's made its way, once somebody clicks that phishing email, a lot of times, the payload, so to speak, goes undetected by your traditional antivirus. Even the next generation antivirus engines
Yep.
aren't necessarily able to keep up with that stuff. So now we have this thing, this EDR, that is sort of that advanced threat detection, being able to see these things moving around. Because one of the things is, once that phishing email link is clicked or some information is entered, once they can find an entry into that network, they sit behind the scenes for a while, and they call that dwell time to the
Yep.
non-techie people. But that dwell time, we've seen somewhere around 45 to 90 days, that threat actors are playing around in the systems. And, like, it's sort
Before
of
they've
nuts to
even
me.
done anything. Yep.
Yeah, they haven't even, like, yeah, they're looking for your backups, really what they're looking
Yep.
for. They want to disable the backups. They want to find, what systems are mission critical, that they can disrupt your business and ask for a ransom in order to get it back. But having those tools in place beyond antivirus, which does, it's important to have that, but that's like table stakes now. And having those tools in place to say, hey, there's an anomaly in your network. It doesn't look, these things aren't supposed to be doing these things on your computer. These applications that you usually use aren't communicating the right way. And that's where AI comes into play and things like that, on on the defense side, which is great, to be able to use that. But you have to put that stuff in place, or it's not going to find these things. They're going to be able to do exactly what they want as threat actors. And I like to remind people that, cyber criminals have one job, like one job, day in and
Hmm.
day out, is to hack your stuff and find a way in. And they're not even looking specifically at you or this person or that person. They're doing ransomware as a service,
Yep.
things like that, where it's a very broad sweeping thing until they can, like you said, Daniel, until they get a hit and they say, we got someone, now it's time to go. Um, and they sort of know that. But unless you put these things in place, unless you have a plan in place, and you're working with a good, responsible organization, it's tough. Like, you would be caught blindsided by this, and you'd be trying to figure it out after the fact, which is a little bit too
Correct.
late.
And we have a question here from one of the viewers. Wagner
Sure.
asked, business owners also tend to think that cybersecurity is something very expensive. What are your thoughts on this? I'll go ahead and take this here live, guys. I think since it's something that's somewhat of a newer, I guess, technology or newer need for business owners nowadays, there tends to be a little bit of a disruption between price and value for what cybersecurity is able to bring for your business. Because it's not just about the option of protecting your business, but it's also protecting the sustainable long-term health and growth of your business as we go about it. So being able to look at it as an investment instead of an expense is much more important than actually looking at it as just something that I'm putting money to and I'm not sure what's going on. Just something quick to mention on that is every business has different needs when it comes to their cybersecurity needs. So it's very, very difficult to say that, hey, it's going to be one blanket solution across the board for everybody. So depending on what your business needs, talk to your cybersecurity experts in your area, talk to us. We'll be happy to kind of identify some weak spots, what you should work on, offer some solutions that will help cover your business on a month-to-month basis.
Yeah, that's great.
One one thing that um, is- sorry, I guess that was a question he had put in. I just saw it pop up. When I was in the army, the drill sergeants had a saying, and they would sit here and say, "Smooth is slow, slow is fast." And that goes back to what Brian was talking about with the dwell time. As soon as they get inside your network, they want to make sure they're undetected, and they want to make sure that nothing picks up on it. So they are going to move as slow as possible. They're not going to try to jump the gun, because as soon as something triggers it and they get kicked out, they could have just lost the payday.
Yep.
Exactly
So
right. I'm gonna go ahead and move on,
yep.
guys, here into cyber resilience. It's a keyword top term here that a lot of people are googling recently. So we figured we'd go
Yeah.
through it together here, guys. Uh, Cyber resilience is basically a measure of your business strength in preparing for, operating through, and recovering from the eventuality of a cyber attack. And on this next statement here, I think it covers NIST. Cyber resilience relies on the successful ability to identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover quickly from an adverse cyber event, and combines cybersecurity, business continuity, and incident response. Just if anyone can break it down into
Yeah.
layman's terms, I would
I
appreciate
can
it.
try. I can do my best here, right? Because this is something I talk about an awful lot. Cyber resilience. We talk about cybersecurity an awful lot in our world that we're in, right? In this technology space today. But when you talk about cyber resilience, it's really it's how your business is going to handle the whole thing, right? So it's not just that cybersecurity piece. It's how are you going to keep the business operating throughout that incident? How are you going to respond to that incident? Um, Things like that don't even come to mind to people, even on the technology side of things. Like, I don't know about you, Daniel, but I've been sort of blinded by being very technically minded in my career and not thinking about people and process in the grand scheme of things. And when you're talking about something like incident response, it is all about people and process, the
Yes, it
tools and the
is.
technology. Yeah, that's just like a piece of it, right? And when we talk about business continuity, of course, it's not just like, okay, back up. Like, how do you back up? There's different flavors,
Well, see,
right?
that's also something I wanted to touch on.
Yeah.
You will see a lot of companies that will go through and they will invest in having the cybersecurity to make sure that uh, they're at the lowest risk possible, because there's no such thing as zero risk. So you will
Right.
always be at the lowest risk possible of having an attack, having an intrusion, getting hit with ransomware, something of that nature. And that's what they focus on. But people forget, look, it is a fact of life. It can happen. So once you get hit and all of your information is hit, it's all encrypted, and you're getting phone calls from somebody that sounds like, they're behind a mask or something of that nature. Or you're getting an email and they're saying, hey, if you want your information back, you need to pay us, 2,000 Bitcoins. And you're like, oh, well, I mean, that's just $2,000. No, it's Bitcoins. And that can be $200,000 that it costs
Yeah.
or more, because the price of those is always skyrocketing and they're untraceable. So it's definitely the preferred method that they're going to ask for payment. But it goes back to the backup side of it. Once all of that's hit, once your backup is hit, once it is no longer any good, do you have a secondary backup? Do you have an offsite backup? Is there a cloud backup? Do you have a time delay between them of whenever it cycles? Because you can have all the backups you need, but if they all happen at the same time, then that means whatever took it is going to hit all of your backups at the same time. So it's just as focused on that aspect as it is the front load aspect as well.
That's
It's a great
so,
point there, guys.
yeah, that's good. Great points there. And this is another thing. Like um, we talk about regulatory compliance and not just HIPAA, but like think of the industry. There's regulatory compliance coming out of that. And when we're talking about cyber resilience and what you see up there, that NIST framework is a cybersecurity framework, National Institute of Science and Technology
For
standards and technology
standards, yep,
and
standards and
technology.
technology.
Sometimes I get it. But now they're on their second iteration. But it is a framework that, for folks who are a little bit less technical or not familiar, but it is a framework from which you see many other compliance standards So many of us who've been around for a while to see NIST evolve and go in different directions, it's kind of like the Swiss Army knife of standards, of frameworks, if you will, from a technology standpoint about how you would identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And now NIST 2.0 is adds one in here, not just recover, it's now and governance. So it actually kind of feeds back into HIPAA compliance and making sure that you're compliant with those standards. So it's really all inclusive. So not to belabor the point, but it is these are recommendations coming from national institutions. It's not just like we sat at a desk somewhere and cobbled together some cool tools that we thought work well. There is a methodology behind all this, but
Sure.
to go into that, NIST is also the basis for a lot of the requirements you see in cyber liability insurance, and we've seen that evolve dramatically over the last few years.
It's actually one of the points I wanted to bring up here,
Yeah,
Ryan, if you don't mind, was
yeah,
kind of touching on what Daniel was speaking about just recently, and a big one that cyber liability insurance looks for is immutable backups and the importance of having access to information in the case of an eventuality. And just kind of everything we've spoken about so far, to a certain extent, is kind of what's needed for your liability insurance to operate properly. And I'll let the experts here take over a little bit further. But part of my understanding is this is basically your basic needs to have somewhat protection from your liability insurance.
Correct.
yeah. So one of the things that I would say here is like maybe 5 or 6 years ago, if you were a business owner and you wanted a cyber liability insurance policy, and you could fog a mirror, you would get that policy, and the rates weren't bad. um, but now they're asking some questions, and they're asking some questions because they need to mitigate risk. And the insurance carriers have had to pay out a lot of claims
Hmm.
because organizations were not mitigating risk. And so they look at a certain number of things as ways to mitigate risk, but having good policies in place, the people and process part again that come into play. And then depending on the carrier, depending on the policy, and how much you're asking for from a coverage standpoint, this list could be 140 pages long of things that we've seen out there. So
Hmm.
lots of requirements for good reason, but it's important to work with. This is something I always go back to: is working with an organization who knows about the regulations that you fall under and who can look at your cyber liability policy and say, well, wait a minute, before you sign off on this renewal, you're not doing this thing. And they would potentially not pay on a claim. So, working with a great technology organization is important there. A little sales pitch for you.
For,
Well, I
for
mean,
sure.
but no, what you say actually has a lot of validity behind it,
Yeah.
because if anybody within the past, especially 3 years, has started looking for cybersecurity insurance, you get all of these just stories from people coming back saying it's a nightmare, it's a headache, it's a pain. We
Yeah.
had to pay X amount of money, and then we needed it, and they didn't pay out, right?
Yeah.
So they feel like they've lost money on it, which that's only one side of the coin. Okay.
Sure.
The other part of it is, as you said, with that big documentation, you might fill out, yes, our passwords are secure. Yes, we have this. Yes, we have that. You know, sometimes they'll ask for little proof, little screenshots, or a scan, something showing. But your environment is always changing, always evolving. So then if those things fall off, if something gets bypassed because it's not continuously being scanned, monitored, looked at, reported, logged, the whole 9 yards. Then whenever you do need it, that's when the cybersecurity insurance company, they're going to come back and go, okay, before we pay anything out, prove that you're still following those policies and standards.
Right.
And you'll see these companies fall off and they'll go, okay, well, we're not going to pay then because you did not uphold your end of the agreement.
That's one of the things that wanted to make sure we brought up here is it's not a one or the other situation. Well, you know what? I'm not going to worry about my security. I'm just going to grab an insurance policy, and if something does happen, then I'm covered. I'm fine. It's a work together type program where you need to have some cybersecurity in place to ensure the protection that you're going to get from a liability policy, and working together with your security company, with your cyber company, and with your insurance company, you'll make sure that you're continuously compliant with your new cyber liability insurance policy. Like Daniel said, there's a lot of things that, minor things that we may look at it as business owners, pediatricians, as something minor that the liability insurance company is going to say, hey, you know what, that right there, we don't like that. So today we've decided not to pay you. And that's what working with a company like us is a good idea to make sure you're continuously compliant on what's needed from your cyber liability insurance, amongst other things.
You think about something as simple, and like I go back to this because this is something that, there's a lot of IT companies out there positioning the latest and greatest tools, the whiz bang gadget, as I like to say. And they're not necessarily looking at the whole thing, um, and looking at the process around it, right? So you think about something as simple as an employee um, says, "Hey, I want to put in my 2 weeks notice. I got a great job opportunity elsewhere." Okay, great. Employee leaves. Life goes on. Maybe you rehire somebody new, and you get the new person even set up in the systems, right? But what's that process for offboarding an employee? What systems do they have access to? Were they financial in nature? Do they have patient information in them? There's so many questions, but
Correct.
having a process for that happens every time, right? Because otherwise you're leaving yourself open. And I can tell you a quick story of a partner of ours in Georgia. They were meeting with a client. They found credentials for sale on the dark web for one of their users, and the owner brushed it off and he said, "Oh, she hasn't worked here in 5 years." And he goes, "Okay, well, you know, not for nothing, but her credentials are in here." And they tried them in their Wells Fargo bank account, which had over $1 million in it. It was a checking account that they were using for business transactions, and she still had full access to the account. And she's only worked there 5 years now. Luckily, she's a good person and she hadn't tried. But had she tried, she could have done some damage to that business. So thinking about things like that, that are just process oriented, that are like right underneath of us in our busy days and our busy lives, just saying like, well, wait a minute, what's the checklist? Like
Yeah.
what are we missing here, right?
Having some good employee exit protocols, basically, to make sure they're off all the systems and
Well, you just can't trust that every person you've ever hired is going to be an upstanding citizen and very ethical and always, and you would hope so, but you never know. You never know when they left what would happen, or maybe if their credentials are exposed
yeah.
somewhere else for sale. So there's so many
If you
Yeah.
set it up so that employees have to change their password every 90 days, does that help with the exit piece? Because if an employee doesn't change a password, then maybe their credentials go away or something like that?
There's still a period of time where it'll be exposed either way, if they're not shut off right away. I think one of the things that can probably help a lot is on onboarding, making sure each user has a proper user roles. That's a conversation me and Daniel had a while ago about proper onboarding, what user roles, what each person should be able to access and not access. Also help eliminate some people who are maybe in a different department being able to access, some information in finance. But the I think the best exit protocol is once you've made a decision or once that person has told you they're leaving the business, immediately shutting off all access, whether it's a temporary shut off until you find out how exactly you want to transfer data from that user's email, user information to another user, or however you want to do that. But having a temporary stop of all access and changing the passwords immediately from an admin side might be a good way to go about it. I let Daniel and Brian, who are much more versed in this than I am, give
No,
a little bit more
no,
insight. But
for that, a lot of it is just following the best practice guidelines that have been put in place. Instead of just terminating the account outright, first thing, changing the password, removing all roles, making sure that there's a OU or a group set up that if a member is a part of that group, they have no access to anything. So having the account disabled, moving it to that scope, checking it out, it's just a set of steps to follow and go through instead of just clicking disable and move, because that's fine until it's not. And that's when you see a lot of the internal attacks happen, such as you were talking about with somebody having access to a bank. So by making sure that every step is followed and that nothing is trying to, jump the line, and that you're not just trying to hurry up with it, that helps to ensure internal accountability, both from a MSP side as well as from a compliance side, from a employer side. And it's just ensuring that every single step was taken to limit, cut off, and terminate access.
great points here, guys. I think I'm moving on a little bit into the healthcare side here when it comes to regulations. Heidi, I think you're our
Yep.
expert here, but just the points here, and you can expand on any of them as you like, Heidi. But overview of current healthcare data privacy regulations. Is there anything you want to mention on that, Heidi?
HIPAA does a really good job of kind of updating that stuff. And, for the most current thing, I would just Google like current HIPAA regulations. The privacy practices, they don't change too much. It's, any kind of identifying information, name, date of birth, social security number. You want to make sure that you have like super security around those things. That's the PHI, the protected health information. Um, the from the employee side, those quarterly reviews of HIPAA regulations, HIPAA requirements. Again, they're constantly getting updated with COVID. It had to get updated for telehealth, texting, like all this stuff. So, you want to have a very regular quarterly review of the regulations, of the practices, of the new things that are being added to it. Again, when it comes to the documentation and the record keeping, you want any kind of hard copy documentation behind two locked doors. And when it comes to the documenting electronically, you got to make sure you have that MFA and that your employees are required to change their passwords for that frequently as well. Um, every, I think it's important for every company, every healthcare system to have risk management, right? Because that's the go-to person should something sort of happen. So if you're able to have a risk management person, that's super helpful. Um, I'll go back to what Brian said at the beginning. The fact that that place that you said got fined $36,000, that actually seems like a really no low number to me, because the fines are in upwards of like 250,000, and if there's a
Oh
HIPAA
yeah.
violation. So, I hope that kind of answered those pieces of that.
For
I
sure, for
think
sure. I mean, we've only got a few minutes left here, guys. I think we got 2 minutes left, so let's try to wrap up as quickly as we can here.
good.
But please go ahead, Brian.
Oh, well, that particular scenario was the mishandling of two patients' records, and it was a small practice. It was like a 5-person practice. And so I think the example there is that, yes, there are many scenarios where, it's six-figure fines and things, but those smaller organizations are just as susceptible to those regulations now. And I think we're seeing where HIPAA has some teeth in it to actually levy those kinds of penalties.
Like in my private practice office, I don't keep any client files or records or anything in there at all. At all. Just because, sorry.
I said that's probably wise. Yeah.
It's not, yeah. And so depending on the office environment, you really want to just not have that stuff around, honestly.
Right.
One of the things I'd like to mention here to wrap up, guys, is we're more than happy to help analyze, go through, speak about with any one of you guys about your current cyber health, current policies, current practices, anything you might have any doubts about in terms of HIPAA compliance, in terms of your liability insurance compliance, anything along those lines. We're happy to set some time aside, speak to you all about it whenever the time comes, whenever it's good for you guys. One of the things that we do offer for free are dark web reports, something that Brian had mentioned a little earlier in the conversation, where if you're just curious to see if by any chance a former employee of mine from 5 years ago has access to $1 million, I want to make sure I can cut that off before it happens. And that's something we'll gladly run through with you guys for free. So just some tidbits to leave you guys with. We're here happy to help and add value any way we can. I think Daniel's got something he'd like to add.
Well, to piggyback off what you were saying, not only would that dark web scan be able to show you something like that, but it also can start to give you a good idea of where your company sits from a cybersecurity standpoint. If you have multiple hits coming back saying they're from combo lists, from other companies, maybe vendors you used that had gotten breached, such as AT&T, Verizon. If you have your business accounts, there's hospitals that now, instead of doing the actual paper chart, and they're giving them iPads for them to use that are being purchased on company accounts. But just those same accounts, if you see, hey, it looks like every account we have was actually breached, but it wasn't from our office. It all comes back from AT&T, or it comes back from a website, or it comes from something else, a vendor of theirs that was breached. But since they use them, their information is now out there as well. So that's something else to keep in mind, is not only how secure your environment is, but the vendors and the people you use. And a dark web report can very easily go ahead and show that as well.
Awesome. Yep. If anyone has any questions, anything they'd like to discuss, I'm going to put my email in here in the chat. Feel free to send me an email at any time, and we'll schedule something, get together, and go from there.
All right.
Thank you, guys. Take
Awesome.
care.
Well, it was good meeting
Thank
all
you,
of you.
everyone.
Everybody have a good one.
Take
Yes,
care.
well.
Care.